Today, we're here to demand that the provincial government take action and develop a plan for the housing needs of on and off-reserve Aboriginal peoples in Canada. Canada, but particularly the provincial government, need to wake up and do the body count. Homelessness is a critical issue for Aboriginal people in both rural and urban settings. It is estimated that Aboriginal people constitute at least 30% of the homeless population in the Greater Vancouver Regional District, even though Aboriginal peoples make up only 4% of the general population. The most vulnerable people in Canada, and particularly in the downtown east side, consist of Aboriginal women, single parents, and people with mental health and/or addiction issues. Where are they going to go? As an Aboriginal woman and a single mother, I know how hard it is to find permanent housing. Another huge issue is Aboriginal women fleeing abuse. They end up homeless, then try to go to shelters, which majority of the time, these are full, and they end up going back to their abusive relationships, just so they have a place to stay. On top of that, if you're a homeless single mother, there's the risk of your children being taken away. This vicious cycle needs to be broken. We need social housing now.
So even social housing is not always the fix, but it definitely makes a massive difference in the stress level of whether or not we're going to lose our home or whether or not we're going to eat. Or do we get to buy new shoes, or do we pay rents? It's dramatic, and the fact that it boils down to a lot of times the assumption, you were speaking of the stigmatism of mental health, well, the stigmatism of poverty.
And I always like to look around, I saw some new graffiti, and it said again and again on my street, change the game. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. We're challenging senior governments to change the game, to build social housing, to build 10,000 units a year, to deal with this crisis that's been created through their own inaction. The necessity of finding homes for over 100,000 people in our province. But it's important to remember that this is not a game. This is a profound crisis, and this is a dire human need. Tens of thousands are at risk, many of whom are our most vulnerable populations: women, Aboriginal people, immigrants, people with mental illness and addictions. Housing is the single most important determinant of action,
because that's what we're here tonight to do, is to start a campaign that is about action in order to put social housing on the agenda in the provincial election and to make it a real thing in this province, because there are more than 100,000 people in this province who are facing homelessness. And it requires the action of working and low-income people themselves in order to change this political agenda and to put social housing back into a real place where real people can live in dignified, decent housing as a matter of their right.
Yes. Home ownership, Vancouver has the second most expensive housing market in the world. Right? So the place that has the most expensive housing market is Hong Kong. And guess what they have? 50% social housing. Vancouver also has the most expensive rental market in Canada. An average one-bedroom apartment is $965. We have 10,000 homeless people. Being homeless is not good for your health. 57 of these people died in Vancouver between 2007 and 2010. And homeless people have to use a lot of services. So all the studies show that, of course, it's cheaper to end homelessness than maintain it. There's 40,000 hidden homeless people. It's extremely stressful to live in a car, have to live on a couch in somebody's house, this kind of thing. There are 60,000 at risk of homelessness. We need 2,700 new units a year of low-income housing just to deal with population growth. We have 40,000 co-op and non-profit units whose operating agreements are expiring, and those units are at risk for low-income people. And we're losing all kinds of SROs, and there's an uncounted number of apartments that are lost to higher rents from gentrification.
One man was from Squamish, Musqueam, and he allowed me to be on his territory. And that really, really means a lot, to have a place where you can call home and a place where you can be and not get pushed on from one place to the next. Because the perspective I want to speak on is the call to end homelessness and how important that is. and how important it is that all three levels of government work together, the municipal, the provincial, and the federal, because we need a housing strategy right across the nation, right across the province. Some people say that the shelters are a solution to homelessness, but really social housing is, because the shelters are very stressful to live in. I don't know, for those of you who have ever been in a shelter, they're constantly on you, find a place, and you know, they're riding your case, and you have to have a review meeting every 3 days, and it's very, very stressful. And you're dealing with other people who are also under a lot of stress, and your things may go missing, and you don't have the proper ID that you need, so all those things add costs. And if you look at housing me in a jail, because I've been in a jail too when I was homeless in Calgary, for loitering and jaywalking and for obstructing a police officer. I spent 2 months in a jail, in a psychiatric jail, and I know that's Harper's solution, is throw everybody in jail and build jails, but it would be much more productive if he built social housing for people.
Second, it's a good investment because failure to invest in housing isn't a neutral proposition. It costs us a lot, and that's something we've already heard from others. Homelessness is costing the healthcare system, it's costing the criminal justice system, it costs our social services. Not dealing with housing and homelessness is a false economy.
By temporary foreign workers, we mean seasonal agricultural workers, live-in caregivers, and low-skilled workers. These are your temporary foreign workers. The housing issues faced by migrant workers must be seen through a human rights lens. And what is the human rights framework for housing? We believe that this framework rests on the points that migrant rights are human rights. That temporary foreign workers must be seen as individuals with dignity. We also believe that there are standards in housing that must be met. And when these standards are not met, and when these standards are violated, then there must be mechanisms to resolve these. The Temporary Foreign Workers Program are in opposition to these rights. The Live-in Caregiver Program forces live-in caregivers to give up their human rights by requiring them to live with their employers. Workers participating in the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program have been subject to notoriously deplorable housing conditions. Rights, but very fewer rights, limited access to services, and generally no access to settlement services. Housing, as well as employment standards, are provincial and municipal concerns. We call on the provincial government and the municipal government to ensure adequate housing and living conditions, as well as to enforce Employment Standards Act and WorkSafe BC regulations through more frequent and unannounced inspections of work sites. It is important that our main recommendations we also see echoed in the fifth demand of the Housing Coalition, which is extend housing rights to temporary migrant workers by granting them permanent legal status. This has been the long-standing call of Migranti BC and other migrant organizations for landed status, for live-in caregivers, and for temporary foreign workers. We remind Canada of its obligations under the 1976 International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that declares all people have the right to adequate housing. Under the BC Human Rights Code, which aim to ensure fairness and equality of opportunity, even in provisions concerning housing. 44 countries have signed on to the UN International Covenant for the protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. Canada has not signed on to this document. Canada also has not signed on to the Domestic Workers Convention, which was adopted by the International Labour Organization last year. The Coalition's fifth demand to end housing discrimination is one that we strike a chord in all the calls of the migrant organizations. Migranti BC stand with the Housing Coalition. We join our voices with yours. We will march along with you to end housing discrimination. And I was thinking when Ivan was saying we should have a chant. This is a variation of your chant, if you allow me. Yeah. What do we want?